We were supposed to have a large panel who, due to some technical issues, we have 3 of them, which is fantastic. But we've been also joined by somebody who's not on the programme, Nicholas Piachaud, who is the head of policy and advocacy for the Varkey Foundation, who run the Global Teacher Prize, a large learning ecosystem. But I'm delighted also to be joined on the screen by Michael Stevenson, who is the Vice President of Global Education for Cisco Systems, former Chief Information Officer and Director of Technology at the Department for Education and Skills in England, the founder of the BBC's Factual and Learning Directorate, and a senior advisor at the OECD, so welcome, Michael. I'm also joined again on the screen by Vishal Talreja, who's an Ashoka Fellow, an Eisenhower Fellow, a Salzburg Global Fellow, the co-founder of Dream a Dream in India, as well as the founder-director of Unlimited India and a board member of India Cares Foundation. Again on the screen we have Justin Van Fleet, who's the president of the global children's charity Theirworld, the executive director of the Global Business Coalition for Education, and who has previously served as the director of the International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity and was the chief of staff to the United Nations Special Envoy for Global Education, the former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown. And last but not least, who I'm very glad to have on the stage with me is Elise Tarvainen, the COO of ISKU International, who is also a former teacher and school principal, focusing on developing learning and innovation communities with collaborative operational culture and learner-centered working approaches. So we are going to have a discussion about learning ecosystems. To start us off, I know that this might be a concept that's familiar to many of you, but just in case not, I would like to talk a little bit about the purposes of them and where they come from. So in 2019, Valerie Hannon, who is the co-founder of the Innovation Unit and the Global Education Leaders Partnership, and her team wrote a report about the potential of learning ecosystems. Unfortunately, she is unable to join us today for personal reasons, so I would like to ask Michael, who has been working with her and myself and Vishal on a new piece of research focusing on learning ecosystems, to start us off by explaining a little bit about what they are and why they're important. Michael. I thought this might happen. We can't hear Michael, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to hear him. Michael, would you try one more time and we'll see?
I will. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Thank you. Well, I think a lot of people now feel that the classical traditional education system, tops down, run out of the town hall or the ministry, is not a system that will deliver the quantity or quality of learning that societies and people need to thrive in the 21st century. A lot of organisations are talking about ecosystems. Think of Knowledge Works, Education Reimagined, and there's an increasing knowledge base really that says this is what ecosystems are. I think of the recent British Council report on ecosystems amongst refugees. I think the amazing work done by Pavel Lukcha in Russia on learning ecosystems. And I think of Valerie's own work, with the Innovation Unit, her local learning ecosystems, thinking that you yourself referenced a moment or two ago. So what has emerged really as the set of characteristics that define an ecosystem? Easy to say, but what do we mean? Well, I think a handful of worth reflecting on. You're always talking about a diverse set of learning resources and pathways for learners. Not one size fits all. You're thinking about activating and sharing those resources for learning in ways from diverse suppliers, so it's a very different experience if you're the learner in the middle. We think these ecosystems are dynamic in terms of the way they're put together, and they're kind of porous around the edges. You can't simply say, is that there in form any longer? It's kind of everywhere. There's an enabling infrastructure. There's a combination of formal and informal learning institutions, traditional learning institutions, and new entrants. The governance is shared. This is not a case where, 15 individual education institutions across a town, maybe more, all look after themselves with their own governance, people come together and say this is important enough to do this together and maybe pull the funding. They're definitely learner-driven, learner agency at their heart, and they're not simply trying to offer a traditional foundational literacies curriculum, though that may be important. They have their eye on 21st century challenges in some way that go beyond that core curriculum that we have known these last 30 years. I'd just say one other thing, perhaps two if I may. One, natural ecosystems evolve. And there's a question about how far we actually have to design these things, or kind of just appreciate what they are and let them flourish. There's a rather good idea which has been encapsulated by Catherine Prince from Knowledge Works. She says, if we don't design intentionally for a vibrant learning ecosystem, we risk creating a fractured landscape in which only learners whose families have the time, the money and resources to customize or supplement their learning journeys get access to the learning that adapts to and meets their needs. And that, I think, encapsulates a really important idea, that we might have this wonderful vehicle for 21st century learning, but accessible only to the children of the middle classes. And that is not the point. This has to be an idea for everyone. Last thought, I just want to pick up the inspirational work of Pavel Luksha in Moscow, Global Education Foundation, who's thought about the kinds of leaders that this ecosystemic approach might take. Talks about sense makers who create new ideas, designers who design systems, connectors who enable relations, and storytellers who do the communicating and the engaging, but all of them change makers, being the change. And I do think that that leadership dimension really indicates what a new paradigm we're talking about here, and how much we'll have to do to nurse it all into place. So that would be my take, borrowing on many of the ideas of my close colleague Valerie Hannon, who, as you say, can't be with us, Leonora, my take on what we're talking about here.
Thank you very much, Michael. So, along the lines of doing things and nursing it all into place, the reason that you've been invited to join us as panelists in this session is because that is exactly what you are all doing. In very different ways, you are creating and nurturing learning ecosystems. Elise, your ISKU Center ecosystem was born in Lahti in Finland in a with a very particular partnership, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what that looks like and how it's grown organically.
Thank you so much, and greetings from Finland indeed, from the -24 when I left. But good to be here with you all. And I come from ISKU Center, and it's really a learning and an innovation ecosystem which is very much of industry-led. And what is special in it, there are two universities, Research University and University of Applied Sciences, with 5,000 students having their campus at the company premises, where there is also a manufacturing unit. And ISKU is a family-owned business since 1928. And all these investments done for this ecosystem, building it up, it's the question of legacy. And it's a value-driven ecosystem where the learning and innovations are in the heart, but also from company and investment point, what is the return? It is evolvement. It's a question of that this is how the company can build the bridges to the future, engage the future talents, learn with and from them. And for us, BC is actually as a hardcore of business, though it's first and foremost learning.
Thank you. So it's interesting what you say about it being values driven. I'd like to just ask Justin to come in here, because the Global Business Coalition for Education has just launched Skills Friendly Cities. It's an initiative in the United States. And I think it's guided by 10 principles, which I'd love Justin to tell us a little bit more about in the context of that ecosystem.
That's a good question. And also, if I say a couple of words of this, still about this value-driven thing, the question for us, it's the city you were mentioning for the other speaker, but Lahti is a green capital of the Europe this year. And these values are driving also the sustainability of our ecosystem. And sorry, colleagues, now it's your turn.
Thank you. So I don't know if we still have Justin.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Hi. Yes. Hi, Justin. We
Hello.
can't see you yet, but there you are.
See you, great, everyone.
So, yes,
thanks so much. And
so building on this question of values and the 10 principles in the skilled-friendly cities, I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
great. No, thanks so much. I think the challenge that we're really trying to address through this particular initiative is looking at the skills gap for young people. So that particular aspect of education. And we know that on current trends, 1 out of every 2 young people will not have the most basic skills for a job in 2030. That number dips to about 1 out of every 3 in the Middle East and Northern African region at the moment. And we know that 40% of employers are finding it extremely difficult to find the talent that they need to fill current and existing jobs they have. So what we've done is we've done a lot of research at the Global Business Coalition for Education with Deloitte and a few of our other partners, looking at what are these future skills that young people need, from workforce readiness, entrepreneurship, the soft skills that are being demanded in the workforce, and then how do we actually create opportunities for young people to have those pathways to not only gain skills, but then go into some form of meaningful employment. And so what we've done is we've launched this Skills-Friendly Cities Challenge. So we've put out 10 principles. So what should cities be thinking about? What types of policies and programs and partnerships should they be looking at to build ecosystems and communities where young people have pathways and opportunities to attain skills and then also to get jobs? And we've put these standards out there, and the way that we're trying to incentivize and create these ecosystems is through a challenge. So we're starting in the US, we're calling it our Big Ideas Bright Cities Challenge. And so by putting out these standards and then offering grants for cities that come up with interesting and creative and new ideas, we're trying to incentivize discussions and conversations around how do you get the various partners together, from the businesses to government agencies, to education systems, to schools, to NGOs, to youth serving organizations and young people themselves. And so we're trying to actually take some of these ideas of the different parts of the ecosystem and use this challenge as a way to start conversations and incentivize people to start to build those types of partnerships in their community. And so winning cities will get grants. They'll also get support from some of our businesses, from pro bono opportunities as well. And then we're also going to try to create this a learning community of people in different cities across the US, and then as we expand the challenge globally across the world, to start sharing how these different ecosystems are playing out, and so we can start to learn from one another. And so that's how we're trying to address the skills challenge and try to incentivize some of the innovation, start to share more of the knowledge, and then create ecosystems in this particular instance.
Thank you. So on that note of a challenge, we have with us Nicholas Piachaud, who is the head of policy and advocacy for the Varkey Foundation, who famously set up the Global Teacher Prize, I think 6 years ago. Which is another kind of challenge, which I think has incentivized innovation, but with a different kind of ecosystem, and that's teachers. Nicholas, I'd love to hear a bit about how that ecosystem came about, how it's grown, and what you see it doing.
Thanks so much, Leonora. Hello, everyone. So yeah, our vision for the Global Teacher Prize was to shine a spotlight on the incredible work being done by teachers around the world. And we realized, in so many of these debates we have in the global education sector, teachers tend to be forgotten about or shut out, and their individual stories are not told. So we set up this $1 million award, which sounded crazy, to give teachers a platform to talk to the people who matter, to talk to ministers of education, to talk to heads of governments. And in doing so, over the years, we've created this extraordinary community of hundreds of world-class teachers all around the world, from the Canadian Arctic to Palestinian refugee camps to sub-Saharan Africa to London, where I'm from. And what we've done, perhaps inadvertently, is create a community, an ecosystem of learning. Because it turns out that what happens when you get hundreds of incredible teachers from around the world on a call together is that they don't just exchange pleasantries, they're teachers. They start to learn from each other. And hearing them talk about how they address some of the key issues in education, not from a policy point of view, but from a pedagogical one, from a classroom one, has been one of the most incredible experiences in my professional career. And what I wanted to talk about today was how we're talking about ecosystems. An ecosystem, forgive me if I'm passing, and Leonora, you can do justice to it much better. It's a community, it's a network. And over the last couple of years, we've seen the fundamental networks which have made education work, which have made people learn, fractured by COVID. And we've seen that in our own ecosystem. We've seen teachers who were so effective because they went above and beyond the call of duty, because they were visiting students at home. They were going to parents and convincing them to send their girls to school. They were using their own resources and time and money to make learning work and to give their students opportunities that they would never have had otherwise. COVID has taken that away. It has fractured that fundamental network, that ecosystem which has made learning work. And one of the things we're trying to do as a foundation is now to support that ecosystem of teachers to begin to repair that web, that network. And it's an incredibly difficult job because it's easy to talk about at a policy point of view because we have some sense of the funding and the numbers that are needed, even though we appreciate the challenges are very difficult. But hearing a classroom teacher talk about how they need to get girls back into school, or they've seen a student that they care about drop off the map, that's when you realize the importance of ecosystems, because that teacher needs support from a wider community, from families, from school leaders, and also to some extent at a more abstract level from businesses, from philanthropic entities which are prepared to support them. So it's been an incredible privilege to witness this group of teachers talk about these issues, but really listening to them has given me an incredible insight into the nuts and bolts of what makes learning work. And I should say, as an aside to that, Leonora, who I've had the pleasure to work with, was a member of the foundation for many years and did some incredible work in that as well. So I bow to your expertise in that.
Thanks very much, Nicholas. So it's interesting what you're saying actually about this move from a group of academic teachers who come together to learn, it actually becoming more about the life of the children, slightly more holistic learning. If we still have Vishal, who founded Dream a Dream in Delhi. I think, Vishal, you found there've been educations that have moved from sort of the existing academic systems into more holistic ways of learning in Delhi. And it would be great to hear about how that's working.
Sure, Leonora. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, perfect.
Lovely. Pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. In the context of Delhi, I want to talk, it was an existing ecosystem of public education systems, about 1,024 schools, government schools that the Delhi government works with and runs. And to give a bit of a context, these public education systems are largely designed for children who come from lower economic backgrounds, children of migrant families who have come to Delhi for work, extremely poor families coming from experiences of early childhood adversity. And the system was not designed for them. It was designed as a one-size-fits-all system. So when a new government came into Delhi, which was the Aam Aadmi Party in 2015, and they started understanding some of the complications of this, they said, just us trying to change policy is not going to work. We need to build an ecosystem of stakeholders and bring together parents, teachers, nonprofits, businesses, anyone who can help, and convert this system to a vibrant, thriving ecosystem based on principles of equity and justice. And that was the key principle to develop this ecosystem. So it started off with basic hygiene factors, which was just making sure the right infrastructure was in place. There were teachers in the classrooms, there were toilets in the schools, the buildings were inviting, and children wanted to come into the school buildings. There was enough budgetary allocation to the schools and the school leaders. But once they did that, and did that very well, they realized this is not education, right? If we have to really build a vibrant, thriving education ecosystem, we have to now start shifting our goalposts from an academic focus to the purpose of education designed towards holistic learning, resulting in thriving of every child. That's when the innovations started coming in. And some of the innovations they started doing in the ecosystem was, one is build a cadre of teachers called the mentor teachers, which were a group of high caliber teachers that were now taken away from teaching roles and moved into a mentorship role. And their role was to bring innovation into the system, support teachers in the school system. The second was introduction of the happiness curriculum, which was something that we as Dream were involved with the Delhi government, which was again to move from a thinking of just academic oriented education to an education that is focused on mental health and well-being of every child. Shift the relationship of the child from that of fear of the school, fear of the teacher, to that of joy and engagement. And the happiness curriculum was a turning point in this ecosystem journey, because one, it shifted the relationship between the teacher and the child. The child now wanted to come into the school and was looking forward to coming to the school. The teacher, in addition to delivering a happiness class, which was a daily class of 35 to 40 minutes, 6 days a week, which included mindfulness practices, storytelling, and play-based activities, took that same experience and pedagogical approaches to other classes, which was whether it was mathematics or sciences or languages that they were teaching. So it changed the behavior in the school environment itself. And finally, what it did was, it created a sense of opportunity in this ecosystem that beyond just academics, I can start looking at what are the innovative changes I can bring into the learning environment of the child. How can I use community resources around the school? How can I engage parents around the school to come in and bring their own expertise, bring their own experience into the school system? If there are parents who are, say, potters or artists, how do I bring them in and build this thriving ecosystem around the school itself? And it's still a work in progress, but I'll probably stop here so we can ask more questions. Thank you, Leonora.
Thanks, Vishal. So I want to come back to Michael because he is also running an ecosystem in Doncaster in the UK. And it seems as there are some similarities coming out from the things that you're saying, in particular addressing the skills gap. So in Delhi, in Justin's work in the States, where employers can't find talent, and I know that the Doncaster Talent and Innovation ecosystem is specifically focusing on this. So Michael, could you say a few words about what you're doing there and how that's working?
Of course, yeah, thanks. Doncaster is in South Yorkshire. It's in the north of England. The metropolitan area is probably about 300,000 people. So that's some scale. And the problem is that the industries, the traditional industries, largely fell away in the late 20th century, certainly engineering and above all mining. It's meant that there has been worklessness actually for 2 or 3 generations in some of the communities there. Many of the young people who do well in school choose to leave the town in their late teens and they don't come back. And you see quite some low levels of adult skills amongst those who remain. So it's led us to a talent and innovation ecosystem. And the central concept is that concept of the pathway. How can you take a person, maybe, in primary school, and work with them through successive phases of education, all the way into employment, providing them with the skills, the knowledge, the attributes they need to thrive. The core of it, in terms of the teaching and learning, is problem-based learning. But not any old problems. They're the problems brought into these places of learning by the local employers. They know what they're trying to fix in their supply chain or their product offering. Let's work with local children and local learners of all ages to solve those problems. It's an idea which is focusing on the particular economic priorities for this town over the next 20 years. We hope it'll be the rebirth of advanced engineering, the health economy, creative and digital, green tech. And by the time you thought it all through and focus learning on those areas, you realize there might be a 5th area of economic priority, which is learning itself, which Doncaster could kind of export to the country and elsewhere. Last thought, is this the aim we want for a talent and innovation ecosystem? to fix the jobs problem. Is that a bold enough concept? I absolutely think it is in Doncaster, because people need those jobs and it's a building block for life. But I don't think it's the be all and end all. And certainly I think we can take that learning ecosystem approach and apply it to other dimensions of the town and of the region. It's health and well-being, it's civic engagement, all those aspects of human flourishing. So I hope that this learning ecosystem idea could be a motor for the development of place over the next 20 or 30 years.
Thanks, Michael. You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, is this just the point? Do we just want people to get jobs, be part of a machine and carry on? I've heard a lot from all of you, and I'm going to ask you, Elise, first, but about this concept of values. So we've talked about green capital, Justin's talked about the 10 principles for skills-friendly cities, Vishal mentioned the equity and justice principles. I know that the Global Teacher Prize is founded on a very strong set of values. Michael's just mentioned human flourishing. So I was going to ask sort of what are the drivers for creating ecosystems? And I'm still going to ask that question, but with a nuance. So what's the point and how important are these values? Is that the central point of these ecosystems? Is that what you're focusing on? Elisa?
From our perspective, I think that in the core there is the question of sustainability in its broad meaning. So it's ecological sustainability. It's of course thinking of the social sustainability, and then from the company point of view, industry point of view, it's a question of continuity of the businesses as well. And if you are committed to sustainability in this broad sense, actually. Everybody in the community can engage from their angle into it. And in that sense, the driver is more of commitment to community where you live within and providing all the members the possibility to engage and contribute. And for us, I think that one of the drivers has been that nobody is leading it. Nobody is really owning it. The ecosystem exists because it brings the value add to all its members organically. So there is no one who is the major player, but everybody comes into it because they see that there is something that brings the value add and helps them to fulfill their own mission.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask Justin to respond to that, because it's slightly different, I think, with Global Business Coalition for Education, where there is a leader for this challenge. How important are the principles and the values for this challenge, Justin? And is this just about upskilling youth in cities in order to find them jobs? I saw you did a recent report or a policy brief on data across US cities. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that and how that links to the challenge that you've launched.
Great, no, and it's really interesting to hear Michael and the others on the panel speak, because our principles are much broader than just looking strictly at an education system. It's looking at what are all of these different pieces that need to come together to create these pathways for young people. And we start actually in early childhood education. I mean, in the report that we put out, one of the metrics where we were ranking US cities on was how many young people are in quality pre-primary education, because that's when 90% of the brain develops. And a lot of the soft skills that are being demanded by the labor force are actually hardwired into young people's brains, the ability to think creatively, to work with others, to appreciate differences. So we look at everything from early childhood education to transportation, health, well-being, to meaningful employment opportunities. There's one thing to have jobs, but are they quality, meaningful jobs that actually can help support livable wages for young people and for families? We look at issues of education systems and the curriculum. How are we looking at the curriculum in a way that is preparing young people for the future? We look at employer engagement. So are employers actually getting involved in these discussions at the community level? And most importantly, I think, is the issue of young people themselves. And this is what we're trying to put at the heart of these principles, and also how we're trying to incentivize the generation of these partnerships and the way we're thinking about ecosystems, is putting young people in the driver's seat in these conversations with city governments, with education institutions about the skills that they need for the future and what they're seeing themselves and where they find themselves in these broader ecosystems. So those are some of the principles that we're using, some of the drivers, and we're using data in an interesting way to spur conversations. So we put out the data on the ranking cities and where they stand to be a bit provocative and controversial, and sort of say, why am I at the bottom of the list on youth wages, or why am I at the top of the list here, and what can I learn from these other cities? And so for us, it's a bit of an experiment still. It's interesting to be on a panel about creating ecosystems where I'm not sure if we're going to create them or not, but we're trying to. We're using these different tools that we have, from bringing the data in, setting some of these standards, but really focusing on young people, partnerships, and going beyond education. If we're actually looking at how do we create pathways for young people. It's much more than just skills for a job.
Thank you. And Vishal, perhaps I could ask you to bounce off that, because Delhi is slightly further along in its experiment, if we can even still call it an experiment, of an ecosystem. Where have the values come from that? Did you start out with them? Have they grown up all the way through it? Do you have data like Justin in order to back up what you're talking about, what you're doing? How does it work for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Leonora. So the vision for this kind of education ecosystem came from Manish Sisodia, who's the education minister in Delhi when they came into power. And the primary question they were asking is, one is around how do we ensure every child, irrespective of socioeconomic background, gets access to a high quality education that helps them become a contributing member of society. So there is a much more longer term goal around that. And then what are the levers that we need to put in place to enable that to happen? So while education is one piece of the puzzle, the larger piece of the puzzle has been, how do we shift how parents look at education of their child? Are they looking at education just as a ticket out of poverty? Or are they looking at education not just as a ticket out of poverty to get a job, but also so that they contribute back to the society itself? As young people who go out into the society, become earning members of the society, are they becoming better citizens? Are they contributing to political debates? Are they building on sustainability and climate activism? So it was also about shifting parental perceptions of what they're demanding out of education. And the third was also creating multiple pathways, as Justin talked about, that traditionally it's only been academic pathways. Finish school, you go into university, you finish university, get a job. But how do we now open up pathways? For example, the Delhi government a couple of years back started an entrepreneurship mindset curriculum for young people from grade 8 to 12, which included giving them a seed capital of 2,000 Indian rupees to try out new entrepreneurial ideas. So, and the whole idea being, how can they become job creators rather than job seekers? Creating a whole vocational education environment, so we create parallel pathways, but also ensuring there's dignity in the choice of those parallel pathways. Not just students who are not doing well academically choose vocational pathways, but students choose vocational pathways based on the interest that they have in those pathways. And finally, I think what they're looking to achieve is, how can Delhi as a state, as a city, become a vibrant, sustainable city where everyone is contributing to the growth and development of the city itself. And that was the larger vision for this kind of ecosystem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is still working. So I would like to leave some time for questions, but I would also like to give Nicholas a chance to answer something that I'm sure he's got a lot to say about. But I'd like to put it to the rest of you as well, which is, we've heard a lot about how these ecosystems are growing, what their values are, what some of the incentives are, and why they're there. But I think it's always interesting to find out what the challenges have been in establishing them. We've got different examples. ISKU, for example, is not led by anybody, it's led by everybody. I think that there are varying degrees in the ecosystems we're talking about how community-led it is, or how member-led it is, or how sort of top-down it is. So I can't actually see the screen, so I don't know who would like to answer this question, so I'm going to ask Nicholas first, but maybe if you'd like to wave at me if you would like to talk a little bit, briefly, so we've got time for questions, about the kind of challenges you faced setting up an ecosystem, or maybe none at all, in which case I'd love to hear that too.
No, it's a really good question, and it speaks to something that I wanted to say quickly as well. So it's, we have this, if you're just joining us, our foundation has this incredible learning ecosystem of teachers all around the world, and for the most part it's a fairly organic enterprise. They dictate what the topics of conversation are because they're the experts. We try to use them to talk about some of the key issues that they're facing, whether it's mental health or parent-teacher partnerships. We get them together to talk about the issues that matter to them. However, as a consequence of that, sometimes it's a bit like herding cats, as we say, because there's lots of very enthusiastic people on the line, and part of the challenge of building a community is that it can be self-governing, but it also needs some form of administration. So the challenge and the opportunity, which I have to say because it's an international conference, is that as the community grows, it becomes more difficult to manage. You need to put in place more formal management structures. And if you'll bear with me, if I can have 1 minute, what I'm going to say is learning ecosystems are created by people. And all of the opportunities that are given to young people and to students are also created by people. And the reason we know that is because in lots of countries in the world, they put children in school. They start in school, and 6 or 7 years later, if they make it through, they leave school without being able to read or write a single sentence or know how to do basic mathematics. The only way they're able to do these things is if they encounter remarkable human beings who are part of a wider learning ecosystem which facilitates them. One of our Global Teacher Prize winner for this year, Miss Kashia Thorpe, is from the United States, and she teaches English to refugee kids and to immigrants, to people who came to the US not being able to read or write a single sentence. And she has unlocked, for many of them, pathways to further education. They're going to university because of her and because of this incredible learning ecosystem that she's built around her, that she's talked to businesses to get them to fund scholarships. She's founded an international NGO to bring students to US colleges. So my argument would be, and this is the debate chamber, that at the center of these abstract learning ecosystems are incredible people, are very dedicated teachers. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Okay, at the center of ecosystems are dedicated people. I would like to, on that note, because I can't see the screen, I'm afraid, thank our panelists and open up to questions. So thank you, Elise, thank you, Nicholas, thank you very much, Justin and Michael and Vishal. And I would like to offer everybody here, or through the app, the opportunity to ask questions to any of our panelists. Do we have anybody who'd like to start us off? You're all a bit in the dark. Yes, one behind me. You can yell, but there's a microphone coming. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. My name's Tom Kay. I work with the EdTech Hub. We know that one of the most complex things around education systems is making sure that there's alignment across the systems towards learning. So making sure that teachers are trained in curriculums which are linked with assessments, which are linked with skill sets that students need once they emerge from education. What's the guidance of those on the panel about how best to make sure that systems are effectively aligned across all of the hundreds of different facets towards learning? So
thank you. Thank you very much for your question. As a former teacher and school principal, perhaps you'd like to start us off with an answer, Elise.
Yeah, I think that that is one of the essential questions of how you see the kind of a big picture and what is the essence and what is the red line from the beginning till the end. And what's one wise man once said me decades ago was that if you want to understand a system, you first need to understand how the system is assessed, as people tend to work towards how they are measured. So thinking of how to ensure, I think that we needed to start discussing of the how we assess, how we evaluate, what are the KPIs for the performance we are setting for us. And then we can go back from that understanding of what was the initial idea and whether the alignments are there or not. Otherwise, there will be two realities. The one we wish to be and what we basically state out, and then there is another reality, how we are behaving.
Thank you, Elise. I'd quite like to ask Michael to jump in on that one, because he talked a little bit earlier about the fifth economic area and sort of the learning sector itself. If he's still there, Michael, would you mind talking in response to this question?
Of course, yes. Can you still hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Great. And one of the big ideas we'll need to move forward in Doncaster is a bespoke curriculum, learning model and credentialing model for 300,000 people in a talent and innovation ecosystem. And how do you do that in a country, England, which has established over 30 years a tightly prescribed national curriculum? But unless you're providing people with the knowledge and skills that they need through a learning model, I think in this case problem-based learning, which is going to deliver those knowledge and skills, and credentialing that picks up precisely what people can do and who they are, then I don't think you're going to have something which is really going to prepare people for the jobs and the life that you're offering. So we want to drive alignment, to go back to the question, through a broadly defined framework for curriculum, learning and credentialing. And the challenge will be to figure out the precise relationship to the broader national curriculum, which is there for a reason and can't be ignored. But it's a very ambitious idea, and I think if you get it right, it becomes the kind of the determining characteristic of the whole ecosystem, that everybody's learning around things that matter in ways that are relevant, with credentials that prove what they can do.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. We've got 3 minutes. Anybody else like to jump in? Okay, in that case, I have one. We've heard a bit about we've heard a lot about learning ecosystems, and I think this is one of the things that we're going to be seeing more and more of. There's new research being commissioned. What would you say to somebody who sees where they are and would like to start something similar in their own learning ecosystems? Can be any size. What would you say to somebody who's thinking that this might be a model that they would like to establish where they are? Perhaps Justin or Vishal. We haven't heard from you yet. Vishal? Or not?
I think Justin was just starting to speak.
Oh,
so
perfect.
maybe.
Go for it.
No, I think my only advice is to sort of go for it. As I'm mentioning here, we're trying to create, a lot of this is innovation, right? It's thinking differently, trying something to see if it works and if it can create conversations and spark ideas and really capture the imagination of looking at these challenges in education a bit differently. We're very hopeful we'll be successful, and we're hopeful that it will be a challenge that goes beyond. We are the Global Business Coalition for Education, so we're hopeful that we'll go to cities globally for some years. But again, I think there's no idea, not worth the time. It's not.
Thank you, Justin. I think we've lost you just a tiny bit at the end. But I would like to just finish this discussion by thanking all of you for coming to listen about this. And just to finish, in fact, with the same quotation that Michael gave us at the beginning from Catherine Price, which is about learning ecosystems. She says, if we do not design intentionally for a vibrant learning ecosystem, we risk creating a fractured landscape in which only learners whose families have the time, money, or resources to customize or supplement their learning journeys have access to learning that adapts to and meets their needs. So please take that away with you. We are all here in order, if you'd like to talk any more about learning ecosystems. For those of you who didn't have a chance to have your questions answered, sorry about that. Please enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you very much to my panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.